What's good, everyone? Shay here. So recently I haven't been actually making full songs. All I've been doing is making noise. There's been a point to this. What I do with these noises is I put them in folders so I can use them at a later date when I do feel like making full songs. These are sort of like sound design days. So I might make drum loops on the MPC, or the newest addition to my little corner, the Pocket Operator 33. Excellent for just rubbish noises and that. Or I could be making synth loops, just kind of stuff that I can put in a folder and just drag and drop for ideas at a later date, because it's all come from my own production or my own sound design. Now, yesterday I decided to do a layering pack. So I was layering loads of different synthesizers, but really focusing in on frequency. So I would have 3 different synthesizers running: the Minitaur, the Pro2, and the Lifeforms. And now these would be taking care of different ranges of frequency, either the low range, the mid range, or the high range. I found this really, really useful, and here's why. It kind of got me to learn the synths again, in a way. For instance, this Moog Minitaur, kind of known as a one-trick pony, it is not a one-trick pony by any stretch of the imagination, mainly because the newest update to this, I say it's new, it's probably about nearly 2 years old now, but the newer update, version 2.2, gives you the option to do some under the hood stuff that you would normally have to open up the editor for. You don't have to use that anymore, you can do it all from the hardware, and you do this by just holding down the glide button, and now it acts like a shift button. One of the best features for this is holding down the glide button and then turning the volume of oscillator 2. This now puts it into hard sync mode, meaning that oscillator 2 is hard synced to oscillator 1. Genius. This means that whenever I turn the frequency of oscillator 2, it no longer changes the actual frequency that you hear, it just gives you that sync noise that everyone loves. It's just awesome. One of the other great things about this now is that when I hold down glide and turn the LFO rate, it now changes the wave or the mod source. So normally it was just like a triangle sort of wave. Now you've got triangle, ramp up, ramp down, square, sample and hold, which is kind of like random, but you also get the option to use your filter envelope as a mod source. So I could make a curve with the envelope here and use that as the waveform for the LFO, which is just genius, really. So even though this is marketed as a analog bass synthesizer, doesn't actually have to be bass. Like, this is taking care of the low mids and high mids, so the mid range most of the time. The bass information, Pro2. The reason I've chosen the Pro2 for my bass for this thing is because it's really stable and it's solid and it's fat and it's got 4 oscillators that can all be different stuff, and it is just fat as bass, don't argue. The high frequencies are coming from none other than the Pittsburgh Modular Lifeforms SV-1. Spoken about this before. Brilliant. Really good. This is dealing with the high frequency information. Now, the only thing that bugs me about this one really is the tracking of the oscillators. I have opened this up and gone into the back and calibrated it as good as I can do to try and make these oscillators track to more than 2 octave range. Haven't done it. Basically, so far it tracks within 2 octaves. Okay, anything above that, you've got no chance. Doesn't make it unusable. This is still beautiful. It's amazing. This is running through some pedals over in the corner, the Digitech Polara reverb and the Obscura delay. That is hardwired to this and recorded in. So the reverbs and delays and all the effects are actually recorded in the source sample. So we have the Moog for the mids, Pro2 for the bass, this for the high frequencies. The sound we're going to be making is a techno-ish, tech house-y, 125 BPM lead loop line thing. So let's open Pro Tools and you'll see what the recordings look like, and I'll show you how I layer it and process it. So this is the session. As you can see, I've got 3 tracks here. The first one is the Lifeforms, which is dealing with the high frequency information. This, in the waveform, you can see that there is a little bit of a tail here because, as I mentioned just before, there were reverb and delay on the way in, so they were recorded into it. We next have the Moog dealing with the mid information and the Pro2 dealing with the bass information. So first of all, let's just listen to it as is, with all the processing that was on there, and then we'll break it down afterwards. So let's have a listen. So So you get the idea. That is the looped line. And as I mentioned again before, this is what I've been doing for the past few days, just making loops, layering up some synthesizers, making my own sort of variations of loops. So I've got like a kind of ready-made sound to drag and drop in, but I've always got the session to go back and tweak or just drag and drop those tracks into new sessions. So the first one is the Lifeforms. If I just solo this, and if I bypass all of the effects that it's going through, we'll hear what the Lifeforms recording was. Here we go. So next is the Moog. You can hear there's sort of that sort of modulation thing going on in that. That's the hard sync on the Moog at the minute. So let's listen to that again, and you'll sort of hear it kind of phase in between, rather than changing the actual pitch. So you can hear a different pitch in oscillator 2. It is just syncing it at different rates. So it gives you that sort of extra blended texture. Next we have the Pro 2. So together with no effects whatsoever, just the raw recordings, we get this. Now what I'm going to do is go into each of these. So we're going to start to EQ these separately just to get that balance of all of these right. So because this is just dealing with high frequencies on the Lifeforms, we're going to take away all of the low frequency. I'm not using a fancy EQ here, I'm just using the stock channel strip. No compression, so the dynamics is out of this circuit, just purely EQ and filters. So because this has got the reverb in it as well, we're trying to just get rid of those lower frequencies until we can hear it start to really be apparent that we're taking away some frequencies. So let's try again. Sort of about to 175 works pretty good. Anything more, anything more than sort of 170, you can start to hear it actually encroach on the actual dominance of the sound. All I'm doing is getting rid of that rumble there in the low range. So next we'll look at the Moog, and we'll see what we can do with the Moog. So we can get rid of up to about 50 on there. See what the high's saying. It's not too bad. Maybe start to exaggerate now we've done some cuts. Bit of body in the middle. So we go, we're just cleaning that sound up a bit. Now we'll move to the bass end, the Pro 2. Maybe cut it off in the top to make it sound a little bit more warm and analog. We can give it a push in the low range on a shelf. Cut it to about there. There we go, so it's a lot bassy in that, it's a lot more bassy. Let's pull this back up a bit. Let's listen to them together. So right, we'll listen to it with no EQ on the 3 and then put the EQs in. So we'll listen to it without first and then we'll listen to it with. And then EQs in. So now it's just a little bit more obvious which each of those layers are. So it's really simple EQ, but it's just getting that balance in. The next thing we're going to do is move over to the mix window now. And in this mix window, I'm going to be dealing with the levels of each of them. So far you can see I've slightly leveled them as they came in. But now we can start to think about what's going to take more dominance within this loop. A good thing to do for this is to have some kind of metering plugin open and ready so you can see what the level is that you're going to get. So for this loop, I don't really want it to go above -6. I don't want it to be sort of a limited loop, so it's going to be kind of impossible to get mixed in later on if I start to drag and drop it into sessions, because most of the time my mixes are between -6 to -4, -3 dBFS. So I want my loop to be able to drag and drop into that mix session or that production session and fit in quite nicely. So if we put on, I'm using the Waves Doro meter here. If I just put the hold on the peak, it will give me a little line. And as long as I don't go above sort of that -6, -5 mark, I'm pretty cool. So let's have a little bit of a wander around here while still keeping an eye on the levels. Maybe a bit too much there. So from what I'm hearing from this Lifeforms is a little bit too much, whereas the mid one is a little bit too low. So we're going to compensate for that slightly, bring down the top one, put the peak back, and see how we can get on from our peak meter reading now. So that's kind of more like it, around sort of the -5 area. You can see here I've got some already linked up bus effects. So these send effects, I've got a reverb, I've got a New York compression bus, which is the parallel compression bus, and a modulation bus. So the reverb is EMT plate, just to give it a bit more distance and atmosphere. We've then got the 1176 from T-Rax, which is sort of my go-to parallel compressor. And then lastly, for the modulation bus, is just a little bit of added chorus. This is the Brigade chorus from Universal Audio, and I'm adding these in just as send effects, just to broaden and sort of add a little bit more atmosphere to the individual sounds. Now, probably what we'll find is that these effects are going to make the output of this drive quite a lot, and they are going to be quite dominant. So what I've set up here is a sends bus output track. So you can see here all of my sends, they go to this bus, so I've got an overall volume for all of my sends. So what I'll do now is just keep the Lifeforms in solo here, and we're going to bring in these effects to see what it adds to the top layer. Maybe a bit less reverb on this one because there's already some in the original. And now if we add in the New York compression, you'll see how much this adds to the punch on that top. So let's listen to it on its own without, and then add it in underneath. So it's nice and clean without, but with it, just so much more snappier, just really snappy adding that compression. Then a little bit of the modulation bus. Kind of nice, give it a bit more of the modulation. Really like that modulation bus there. So if I mute the effects now, these are still on and it's still sending, but I'm not hearing any of these effects. So we'll go once round without the effects and once round with. So you can hear it's a lot more snappy. You've still got that extended reverb end, and that chorus, just using from the modulation bus, just makes it really nice and thick. What I might do for my reverb here is just take away any possible low end that's going to come out of that. So it's still going to be fed the low end from the sounds, but it's not going to be outputting anything below sort of 200 hertz. I don't want it to be giving me too much grief in that area. So now let's listen to the Moog. So this on its own sounds like this. So you can kind of hear that sort of added texture in there. To play on that, we're going to add in some of this reverb here. So let's, so you see it's quite high already, so let's see what it sounds like now. Let's go a little bit less than that. Now let's try it with the parallel compression. Let's give it a little bit more. Just love what a parallel compressor can do. And again, this T-Rax 1176 is just one of those plugins that is really snappy. You see here, I've got a really fast release, so it snaps back, fairly quick attack, but obviously all buttons in as standard. Next, let's see what we can get with this modulation bus. So I'll open this up. We'll mute it for now and we'll see what we can get from it. So it just adds that extra width and push to the mid. And what it also does is just exaggerates that sync sound. So now we've got, it's just a lot wider, but because it's in parallel, we've still got the main one straight down the middle. So the two, the high and the mid, sound like this together. Let's see where we are in level. So about the -4 mark, it's still a little bit loud. I can compensate this by just bringing the volume down of this submix at a later date by a couple of dB, but we're still within our -6 to -3 range. And next, let's listen to the bass. So that's nice and beefy. Let's see what we can get from adding in a little bit of reverb to that, which may seem a bit counterproductive, but we'll see what we can get. Still kind of nice. Remember, there's no really low frequencies coming through. Kind of like that just being there, just a little bit of reverb underneath. Now let's add in this parallel. Again, just really big and punchy. So let's listen to all of these three together. So what I'm going to do is just take away all the send effects. So I'm going to just mute the sends and just listen to them without any of the effects on, and then with. Okay, so that's without any of my parallels, now with. It's just so much more power, again without. Then you notice when I bring them back in, just so much more drive and width. And you just get that, it's still separated. It sounds even more so separated than before. Now at this stage, I'll probably go through my mix bus. So you can see from the mix bus chain here, these are the normal things that I would put on any mix bus. So we've got a Pro2, which is in mid-side mode here. This is just taking more away from the sides in terms of the bass. It's kind of like mastering the loops or mastering the new sound design parts without actually having them mastered, if that makes sense. So having them sound as good as they can possibly be. So when I drag and drop them into a production session, they don't actually need that much doing to them, because that's kind of the sound they should work and fit depending on what it is that they are. So here, yeah, we've got a little bit of boost in the low range, which also attenuating. We've got a nice wide boost at 3K here with the Pultec. We've then got the inflator, which is sometimes on, sometimes not, just to add a little bit of extra saturation and a little bit of thickness to the overall sound. This is already sounding kind of thick, so I might not add that in. And then lastly here, this is just a limiter. If I ever want to do like a drum loop or something like that, drag the drum loop in with different layers, balance it all up, get the loop sounding as good as I want. Sometimes I might want a limited sound to it, so the limiter's there. For now, what I'm going to do is put in the Pro2 and the EQ at the end. So we've got a nice clean EQ at the top to make things sound a little bit wider and a little bit polished, and then we've got a nice warm EQ underneath. So I'm going to play it without these and then with. Then with the EQs. You can hear with that, sort of the difference you get from it is it still sounds as clean as it was before. It's just now got a little bit of space added to it. It's just a little bit more space in between those layers, which again is going to help it fit if I just drag and drop it straight into, like, say, a drum loop or something like that. Let's listen to what the inflator will do if I add this in. See, in this case, I'm probably going to leave this out for this because it makes it too much. It might be good for the overall track at the end, but just for the loop, I think this will end up making it sound like it overtakes whatever I'm going to drag and drop it into. Now, what I'd really need to do at this stage is just look at the output to see what the level is on my output here. Bounce that out as a loop once I'm within that sort of -6 range. And yeah, that's kind of my loop sorted. And that's basically how I layer the sounds. Some might think it's a little bit over-engineered for no reason. You might just want to just drag and drop the things in as you see them. But I kind of do it this way to make the analog sounds sound still analog, but still give room and space to wherever I'm going to drag and drop them in. So for instance, I could drag in a standard 4/4 beat, or I could have been working on some drum loops before, some houseier drum loops. And now I can think, right, I know I'm at 125 BPM. Let's drag and drop this wave file. Does it sound good? Sweet. Does it work on its own? Perfect. If it doesn't, I can come back to this session and bounce out the individual parts and use those as stems. So yeah, that's my layering. I hope you found that useful. I know it seems, like I said, maybe massively over-engineered, but this is scaled back. Like, I promise you, this is a scaled back version. There was loads of other mix buses and other stuff, but it just overcomplicated it. But yeah, this is how I layer things. Yay for analog stuff. See you next time.